Oh, hi. Hey, 204s, 204s. What's happening? How's everybody doing? So, this is a part of a bigger discussion that we're going to have about culture. This is sort of my favorite lecture topic to talk about culture. My background in studying youth culture and music culture really seems very useful when sociologists talk about culture. And one of the things in this discussion, we'll have to break this up into two lectures because it's kind of big, is you start to wonder what's the difference between sociologists and anthropologists? Don't they both study culture? Yes, and this is my least favorite question on the earth. What is the difference, other than, what's your favorite Beatles song? The difference between cultural and anthropology becomes very muddled when we talk about culture because both focus on culture. Sociologists tend to focus on a macro version of culture or macro view. Anthropologists are a little bit more micro or interactional, but there's a real overlap. So if you've had an anthropology class or want to take an anthropology class, this stuff might sound familiar. So we're going to talk about culture, and this is also where, and I can't wait to get into this in our Zoom discussions, where people who have lived in other cultures, if you've lived in another country or visited other countries or other cultures, I'm from a strange place called the American South, which is like a whole completely different culture. Really get to sort of bring in their expertise of their lived experience. So I can't wait to have conversations about culture in the Zoom room. Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. Okay, so let's start with a kind of real basic definition of what we mean by culture and then explain what it is. I'm going to give you a real textbook definition of culture. Culture is, here it is on the screen, a way of life that is learned is really important, that is learned and shared by humans. Culture is a way of life that is learned, tabula rasa, and shared by humans. That's basically it. And the idea of culture is it takes the place of instinct. That animals have instincts. They know, birds know when it's time to fly south, or when it's mating season, or when it's, how to mark your territory. Like a dog knows if it pees on a telephone pole, he or she is marking that territory as theirs. We can't do that. I mean, we can't, we human beings don't have mating seasons. They don't have a time. Imagine if there was a time when women sort of just went into heat. If you've ever had a cat, you know what this is like, where women go into heat and men can't not mount them. Might be a little awkward, right? So we need something other than instincts. Instincts are sort of born into us. If I spend a lot of time in my summers, I teach on a beautiful island in the Caribbean called Isla Mujeres. It's this beautiful island dedicated to the goddess Ixtal, which is the goddess of fertility in Mayan culture. It's just off the coast of Cancun, which is like the worst place in the world. And anyway, one of the things about this island is one of the main sanctuaries for sea turtles and their babies. I mean, it's amazing. I've scuba dived with the sea turtles. I've scuba dived and been in the middle of a bunch of sea turtles having sex, which is a little awkward as well. But to see a sea turtle come up on the shore, dig a hole, and lay its eggs, and then cover up the hole and leave and never come back again. They're not maternal sea turtles. And then when those sea turtles hatch, unfortunately on this island, because there's a tradition of people stealing the eggs or eating the eggs, including animals and people animals, they will rescue these animals and bury them at the Tortuga Granja, the little turtle sanctuary. But if you've ever seen what happens when they hatch, they come out of the shell and dig their way out of the sand, and they've got like 20 feet between the nest and the ocean, and there are all these seagulls hovering over looking for a tasty treat. And these sea turtles, right out of the bat, as soon as they hatch, know, I got to get to the ocean as quickly as possible. No one had to tell them. It's just hardwired into them that the sea equals safety, and I'm going to make a run for it. And it's very cute. A lot of them don't make it. A small number do. But it is an instinct that they have. We don't have that. We don't have the notion of peeing on the ground to mark our territory, right? We know that if you put your coat on a jacket or your jacket on a chair, you're marking your territory. This is my chair. I put my coat on this chair. Nobody can sit here. Like, we weren't born knowing that. We had to learn that. How we mark our territory, how we mark mating, how we know where to go in the summertime. Like, oh, I heard, Disneyland is nice. And so the idea here is that this makes up for instincts, that culture makes up for instincts. Why? Well, there's a number of theories why that is. One of them has to do with the size of our brains. That we are born, as primates, we are born with pretty large brains. And so a lot of the stuff that we might have learned in utero while we were developing in the womb, we have to be born kind of early to get this big old head out of mom's, birth canal. I mean, I grew up around horses. And if you've ever seen a horse born, it's the most amazing thing. You got Mama Horse the mare, and she's got a horse in her belly, and then she just kind of like, woo, pushes baby horse out onto the ground. Baby horse sort of shakes off the fluid, and then runs around and is a horse. And basically knows how to be a horse. Doesn't need to go to horse school. Doesn't need somebody explaining the rules of horse etiquette. That horse knows how to be a horse. Because our brains are so big, for us to develop and produce, or mothers to produce, a child that would be able to cope on their own, basically you would have to give birth to a third grader. I don't think any woman wants to do that. Our daughter was 2 weeks late, and that was hard enough. At least I've been told. So the idea here is that culture makes up for instincts. That's a really important thing. So that means all the important stuff that we need to know to survive, we learn after we're born. We learn that after we're born. This is, again, this old hippie saying everything you need to know in life you're born knowing. That's bullshit. You learn it all after you're born. And therefore, going back to our very first lecture, when and where matters. When in time you're born. Are you born, before the Industrial Revolution, after the Internet Revolution? And where in the world? Are you born in the jungle? Are you born in the city? Are you born in, Jordan? Or are you born in New Jersey? Right? I mean, when and where really matter as to what you actually learn after you're born. So that's a really important starting point about talking about why we have culture. So what we're going to do in this discussion is we're going to talk about the elements of culture. We'll get through as much of this today, and some of this may be in part 2, and how these 3 elements that we're going to talk about all fit together, and then kind of how they apply and emerge in the world. And I might even have a chance to talk a little bit about something that is a big part of this record collection, which is hip-hop and You Don't Stop. Look, there's LL Cool J, first album. So this guy, please tell me you know who. Ladies love LL. Anyway, yeah. So we'll talk about hip hop. Okay. So first we're going to get into the 3 elements of culture. Okay. The first element are what we call values. We've already talked a little about values. Remember, we were talking about the sociological imagination, the idea that there is a crisis when you're aware of your values and then they are threatened on some level. Remember that? Because you'll see that on the midterm for sure. Yeah. So there you go. I just reminded that we have to have a quiz pretty soon. So what are values? Well, here's the textbooky definition of values. Values are shared concepts of what is desirable or good. Shared concepts of what is desirable or good. What do we as a culture value? So if you were to think, what are American values? We value money. We value freedom. We value privacy. When I say money, I mean economic success. We value the family. We value money more than the family, though, because sometimes these come in conflict. How many people moved away from their family to a place where they got a better job so they can make more money, right? I mean, so which value wins in that one? There are all these sort of values that we have as Americans. And so we'll talk a lot about values, and I want us to reflect on, we're going to come back to this, what the values of college students might be. Think about value students. So I was going to talk. I don't have the book. This is something that might shock you. Ready? I was a Boy Scout. That's right. I loved camping, and I was a Boy Scout. I come from a long line of Eagle Scouts. And the Boy Scouts, who are now the Scouts, you can be a girl and join the Scouts. Thank you. Change happens. I think that's awesome. I would have loved that as a 10-year-old, I think. I don't know. Who knows? And the Boy Scouts have a Scout oath. On my honor, I will do my duty to God and country to start fires. I can't remember what it is. Somewhere around here I have the Scout manual. I should find it. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. I could not find it. It's in the basement. Anyway, there's also the Scout Law, and the Scout says, and these are values, and I used to have this memorized. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Ah, reverent. That was the one I had the hardest time with as a scout. These are all values. These are things that Boy Scouts are supposed to share as desirable or good. And so let's talk a little bit about where values come from, what we call value orientations. Because one of the things that we notice, we and anthropologists, when you go to other cultures, their values could be different. And often are different. Even within the United States, there are different values. Values around gender, values around violence, values around the idea of what fairness is. So let's talk. There are 5 value orientations. So let's talk about these 5 value orientations, shall we? The first one is our value orientation towards time. How we think about time, that wonderful social construction, time. You can have sort of 3 possibilities here. Each of these 5 have 3 kind of possibilities. The first is we can be oriented towards the past, right? So a past orientation is going to really value tradition, and this is the way that our elders have done it, and we have to preserve the name of the family, and the past is the most important thing to honor. You could be oriented towards the present, living in the moment, as it were, or you can be oriented towards the future. Everything that you do is for your children and their children. You're trying to make the world safe for future generations. You have a very future orientation. So if you were to think about American values, which one of those time orientations do you think that we would have? Past, present, or future? There's a little bit, all these are a mix. We certainly love our traditions, and this is the way we did it. It's a tradition. When people ever say, "Oh, it's a tradition, you can't mess with it, it's a tradition," I always say, well, slavery was a tradition. That was kind of a good tradition to get rid of. And there's a lot of future orientation, right? Saving up for a rainy day, that kind of thing. But really, if you really, one of the things that is a hallmark of American culture is our value of fun. We love fun. We love living in the moment. Why do people want to come here from all over the world? Because we live in the present. A lot of people don't even have savings accounts, right? Saving up for a rainy day, right? They're just putting it on their credit cards, and we're going to talk about this thing as well. So people are really in the now. There isn't much. Think about the environment. There are some people that are thinking, as a parent, I'm like, oh my God, what is my child's world going to look like when she's my age? What is all this going to be like? I need to start, maybe reducing my plastic usage or something. But for the most part, screw future generations. This is fun for me now. Think of all the people that were partying at spring break when the coronavirus was happening. They weren't thinking about what the problems were down the road. They were living in the moment. Hey, you only get spring break once. Party hardy. Yeah. Now they're on a ventilator. So we would say in American culture, even though there's a mix of those 3 orientations, we're probably a lot more present oriented. Our values are focused on the moment. Okay, the second value orientation is our relationship to the physical world, or our relationship to nature, how we think of the physical world. And there are 3 possibilities here. You can live in harmony with nature, right? Your values are that nature is a part of you. So, for example, Buddhism really has a strong belief in living in harmony with nature. If you're going to build a Buddhist temple, the first thing you do before you start digging up all the ground is go through the ground and make sure there are no worms in the ground, because you don't accidentally want to kill a worm while you're digging the temple while you're digging the foundation for your temple. So living in harmony, think about a lot of Native American tribes. You could have a relationship to the physical world that is about mastering, that there is this incredible power of nature, but we're going to try to control it somehow. We're going to try to, maybe damming a river might be sort of mastering nature, or seeding clouds, to help make it rain. There's some way of or domesticating animals. might be a way of trying to master nature. And then the extreme version of that, the third possibility, is subjugation, that nature is there for us, that God put all these animals and all these trees and all this coal and everything on the earth for us, and it belongs to us, and we can do with it what we want, and whatever happens, happens. So what about in America? Where do you think we are on those three? Again, there's a mix, right? I mean, we are moving a little bit more towards harmony. I mean, this is the hope of Eisler, and moving towards a more partnership-oriented society. But for a long time, it's been subjugation, right? All that stuff is there for us. If we have to blow up a mountaintop to get at the coal, blow up the mountaintop. So it sort of flows between those. But I think hopefully we'll move towards harmony and away from subjugation. We're probably right in the middle with mastery right now. We're just trying to stop the dams from breaking. The third one, and this is a really important one, especially when we start talking about gender. The third value orientation is activity. Activity. How we think about our behavior. And here are the three opportunities are. The first is being. The focus on your being, your inner being. So think about that discussion of Max Weber and the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, the Eastern religions versus the Western religions. Eastern religions were more focused on your being and who you are as a person, your dignity, your sort of inner sense of self, like that notion of focusing on your inner self, working on your inner child. So that's possibility number one. Possibility number two is doing. You're just sort of active. It's important to be doing things and being active. Idle hands are the devil's playthings, as they used to say. And the third is becoming. There's something down the road that you are working towards, and your behavior is geared towards that. So American culture, not a lot of being. Let me tell you, not a lot of being. I have until the coronavirus fun hit, I had a Sunday yoga class, and at my gym, when I was doing it every Sunday at 24 Hour Fitness, the yoga class is right next to the cardio machines, and the last 5 minutes of yoga are supposed to be corpse pose. You're basically lying still for 5 minutes, taking in the practice, thinking about your week, and being perfectly still. It is really hard for a lot of people to do that, because in this yoga class, sometimes people will just get up when they're done with the actual vinyasa yoga, and instead of just lying there for 5 minutes, we'll go do 5 minutes on the Stairmaster, because they want to be doing something at all times. You know what is really hard for Americans to do? I'm going to demonstrate this. So this is the hardest things for Americans to do, and hopefully during this pandemic, people are learning how to do it. But here we go. Ready? Just being still, being alone with your thoughts, contemplating, thinking about your week. It's really hard, right? So we are focused on becoming. We want to become rich and famous. But really, when you look at American culture, it's really about doing. It's about, you're supposed to be active all the time. You feel guilty if you're not doing something, if you're not studying for something, or, working an extra shift or doing something. The idea of doing nothing, right? Ugh. I mean, think about how we overschedule kids. We want them busy all the time, and just to let them alone, teach them to be still. I think it's time to teach kids to meditate, something constructive. So becoming, it kind of a mix of becoming and doing. Being is not very favored in our culture. Okay, number 4 is the relationship among members of the group. The relationship among the people in the group. How do people sort of organize themselves? What are the values around how we see each other? So here we go. This might be really clear for where we are in America. You can have an orientation that's what we call a collective orientation, that we're all in this together. You've heard that a lot lately, right? We're all in this together, that we are protecting our tribe, we are protecting our cultural identity. I am just a member of the collective, like the Borg and Star Trek. I'm a member of the collective. You can also have a culture that values the hierarchy. Hierarchy, do you know that word? We'll be using that a lot. That there's a ranking system, and you have low, middle, and high. And you value kind of the fact that there's a status system, and that there's people on the bottom, and that there's people on the top. Or you can have a culture, and this might sound the most familiar, where you value the individual. It's all about the individual, and screw the other people, screw the people on the hierarchy, screw the collective. It's all about me, 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 and my individual abilities. And so when people come to America, one of the first things that they point out when they come from other cultures is how individualistic America is. That it's all about the individual. You rise and you fall by yourself. If you're successful, it's because you did it. You're a self-made millionaire, Donald Trump. That's the biggest crock of shit ever. And if you fail, it's all your fault. Why didn't you try hard enough? You know, we never look at the collective. When people come from societies that are more tribal, that they really value the kind of collective, it's sort of a culture shock when they come here, and like everybody's all alone. There was an amazing documentary called The Lost Boys of Sudan about these Sudanese refugees who are adopted by some Christian families in Texas, and so they're getting out of the war zone of Sudan, and they come to America, and they find it really hard to adjust because there isn't this sense of us. There's just this sort of a sense of me, that we're incredibly individual. Yeah, we value the hierarchy, but not as much as the individual, and we're going to spend so much time talking about that individual orientation. And then the last one is real simple. It's just sort of how we view, this is for our value orientations, the fifth value orientation, how we view human nature. How we view human nature. And when we say human nature, we have to put it in the air quotes, bing, because it is a total social construction of reality. I mean, there is no real thing called human nature, because there's so many different views about what it is. So here you have kind of three possibilities. One is that humans are inherently good. You can trust them. People are good-hearted, and you know, people will come help each other, and you can really sort of let your guard down around people because they're good people. Or people are evil. You can't trust them. They will stab you in the back. Or the third is that there's some sort of mix between good and evil, and maybe it depends on the context. And the way I always think about this is where I grew up in rural Stone Mountain, Georgia. If I wanted to ride my bike to a friend's house to play or to watch movies or read comic books or whatever, I would ride to the house and I would lay my bike down on the front yard, and I'd go inside and we'd, you know, play games or whatever. And then I'd come out of the house and the bike would still be there lying on its side in the front yard, and I'd get on it and ride home, and I'd put it, you know, in the front yard of my home. I wouldn't do that in Portland. All right, I wouldn't do that in Portland because I assume if I lay my bike down and walk away from it, it's going to get stolen. It's just going to get stolen. In Atlanta, when I lived in Atlanta, my bike got stolen all the time. So people there are inherently evil, but people in rural Stone Mountain were inherently good. And so, you know, really it sort of depends on the context about whether we think people are good or evil. Okay, so we can talk about that, you know, broadly, like American values, but let's think about the subculture. Subculture just means sub-part of the larger culture. And there are lots of subcultures. There are ethnic subcultures, and there are stylistic subcultures. I came up in something called the punk rock scene. There are regional subcultures and business subcultures and ultimate frisbee subcultures, beer making subcultures, God bless them. But let's think about the subculture of college students, and we could go through, and as cultural anthropologists, which is another fancy way of saying sociologists, you know, we can think about these value orientations to try to figure out where the values are. So if we were to talk about time, we would say college students probably have a little bit more of a future orientation, right? You are thinking about graduation day. You are thinking about the job that you're going to get. Yeah, there's a lot right now, and if we were at like U of O and there's a lot of parties going on, there'd probably be a lot of present orientation, but there's also this healthy dose of future orientation. You're thinking about what your GPA is going to be on the day that you graduate. You're thinking about what the next step is. Are you going to go to graduate school, or are you going to go get a job, right? There's this kind of future orientation associated with college students that's not as common in the mainstream world. Relationship to the physical world. Well, there's probably not a lot of living in harmony with nature, and there's not really much opportunity to subjugate it unless you're going to OSU and learning, you know, animal husbandry. And why anybody would want to marry an animal, I don't know. So there's probably, like the mainstream culture, a lot of, you know, trying to master it, trying to get through the snowstorm to get to, you know, your study session or something like that. Activity, being, becoming, or doing, right? There is certainly the doing. You always want to be busy. There's plenty to do for this class and all your other classes. But again, because of the future orientation, there's no notion that you're becoming, you know, a graduate of PCC, and then hopefully you'll, you know, become something else after that. Relationship among members of the group. This is an interesting one because PCC is a commuter school, and so people tend to drive to campus or now, climb out of bed and open their laptop and go to class. And so it is very individualistic. If we were at the University of Oregon, where everybody is a duck and everybody has green stuff to wear, and there's this real collective notion of we are the mighty, mighty ducks, and then those people are the, the other teams. Shows you what I know about college sports. The OSU Beavers, right? And the Portland State Vikings, which a lot of people don't even know because PSU is a lot of commuters as well. Those schools have a more of a collective identity. And I think because PCC is commuter, it's more individualistic. And there isn't a lot of hierarchy at PCC. And then human nature, I'll leave that up to you. What do you think of your fellow students? Do you think they're inherently good and you can trust them and you can leave your laptop sitting there while you go get a coffee? Or do you think they're inherently evil and will rip you off? Or is it some type of a mix? So anyway, these value orientations are a way of thinking about values. Okay, this next step, all right, I'm going to clip this because this next one is also a big one. But we'll come back to values. Okay, let's try this.